Disability is extremely diverse. It is any condition that restricts a person's mental, sensory, or mobility functions, which limits their ability to perform everyday tasks. Disability has four main types, and a person can be classified to more than just one. These main types are sensory, which affects a person's ability to use their senses; physical, which affects a person's mobility; intellectual, which impacts on their learning abilities; and psychological, which affects their thinking processes. The severity of the disability is classified as mild, moderate, severe, and profound according to the extent to which a person needs assistance with core activities. Disability can affect anyone, and it can be present from birth or occur during a person's lifetime, for example, due to a disease, illness, or a form of accident. Disabled people often experience barriers that prevent them from having full effective participation in society. According to WHO and World Bank Group's 2011 report on disability, it states that people with disabilities are more likely to live in poverty and experience poor housing, low levels of workforce participation and education, have difficulties accessing appropriate healthcare, and be socially excluded from their community. According to the Australian Council of Social Service in 2013, more than 600,000 Australians with a disability were living below the poverty line. These figures show that more than one quarter of people with a disability are surviving on less than $600 a week, which is half the median household income. There are 2.4 million people with a disability living in households that reported they needed assistance with at least one broad area of activity. The Australian Bureau of Statistics in 2012 also found that 39% of these individuals reported they did not receive the full amount of assistance they required. Roughly one-third of these people have difficulty using public transport, resulting in them using taxis, which then impacts on them financially and impacts on their independence. In 2012, there was over 4 million Australians that had a disability. That is 1 in 5 people. 88% of these people stated that they were limited in the core activities such as self-care, mobility, and found restrictions in employment and schooling due to their disability. Also in 2012, the percentage of people who completed high school with a disability was only 36%, compared to 60% of those without a disability. Without schooling, it can affect anyone's chances of obtaining a job, hence impacting on them receiving appropriate financial support. 51% of individuals with a disability that managed to find employment report that they felt they were restricted in the type of job they can do. 41% stated that they experienced difficulties when changing jobs or getting a preferred one. The National People with Disabilities and Carer Council 2009 stated that Australia is one of the wealthiest countries, and yet people with disabilities too often struggle to access the very necessities of life that most people take for granted.
There are numerous different explanations that one could apply to determine why those with a disability are at a higher risk of poverty. In a 2004 paper by Lister, a social democratic explanation is given. It is argued that poverty and inequality are a result of the way our society is organised, or structurally determined. It is argued that during their lifetime, an individual with a disability will be disadvantaged in terms of education, employment, and inclusion in society, which will increase their likelihood of falling below the poverty line. Individuals with disabilities are statistically more likely to be unemployed, employed only part-time, or employed in low-paying jobs. They are also less likely to have completed adequate education, further disadvantaging their labour market position. This viewpoint highlights the fact that those with or without a disability may have different ideas of what constitutes essential items, which can cause further strain on their limited income. These can include higher expenses for transport, special diet, equipment, and carers. They are also much more likely to consider access to IT services as essential. It is also argued that individuals with a disability may be marginalised and excluded from social groups, which is shown to be a factor in discontinuing employment or study. This explanation also argues that poverty and disability are at times intrinsically linked, with as many as half of all disabilities likely to be an outcome of a lower socioeconomic status, and those with a disability accounting for 1 in 5 of the world's poorest. A social democratic explanation of poverty is also more likely to be willing to assist those who are living in poverty, with things such as social security payments. Another political explanation of poverty is that of a conservative viewpoint. A conservative viewpoint varies to that of the social democratic, as it ascertains that we are responsible for our own situation. It is mandated that if you tax the rich to give to the poor, you are only disadvantaging the rich, as the poor are only poor due to their own shortcomings. A conservative viewpoint promotes education rather than handouts to alleviate poverty. This viewpoint also highlights the notion that poverty and disability are intrinsically linked, believing that the failure for an individual to participate in the labour force market in the past may have caused them to become disadvantaged and enter into poverty, which may in turn have caused their disability. This notion has been particularly relevant among policies towards the elderly. Not all of these conservative viewpoints will apply to everyone with a disability, however, as more severe and unpreventable disabilities can still be looked upon with generosity in the form of assistance such as social security payments.
According to the Australian Council of Social Service Poverty Report in 2013, 27% of people with a disability were living below the poverty line in comparison to the 13% of people in the general public. That's roughly 620,000 people out of the total 2.2 million people living in poverty in Australia. These figures show that you're more than twice as likely to be living in poverty if you have some kind of disability. However, you're not only more likely to be living with less income, but according to Lister 2004, you'll be living with higher expenses. In a report released by the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations in 2009, a broad list of extra expenses were noted. These expenses included home adaptations, specialised transport, home-based services, and aids and equipment. These are the kinds of things that people with a disability have to pay for every single day. The Department of Human Services have documented the maximum rate a single disabled person over the age of 21 can get as being $766 per fortnight. This equates to $55 per day. However, if you fall into the 100,000 people with a disability forced to live on Newstart allowance, you'll be receiving a maximum of $510 per fortnight, which is just $36 per day. To put this into perspective, the cost of a taxi from here at La Trobe to the Wodonga Plaza would cost you around $10 to $15, or 1/3 of your daily allowance. Let's not forget the cost of your trip to return home, or the cost of the trip if you live further away. You could be using your entire daily allowance on travel, and then still have to manage to eat, buy clothing, pay rent, and turn on the heater when you come home in winter. This is just a snapshot of the daily impact poverty can have on the life of someone with a disability. These are just their basic needs.
Social security payments relevant for this group and an argument about the extent to which the benefits reduce or alleviate poverty. For people living with a disability, there are a few payments that are meant to help benefit those individuals struggling with certain conditions. One of these payments is the Newstart allowance, which has basic eligibility requirements, those being you have to be aged over 22 years old but under the age pension, you need to be looking for paid work, prepared to meet an activity test while looking for work, and also you need to be able to meet an income and assets test. Another social security payment is the disability support pension, which is a payment that provides financial aid if you are living with an intellectual, physical, or psychiatric condition that prevents you from finding employment and earning an income. With this payment, you need to be between the ages of 16 and 65. You either have to be permanently blind or have been assessed with some sort of intellectual, physical, or psychiatric impairment, which makes you unable to work. A social security payment that helps with the mobility of people living with certain conditions is called the mobility allowance. It helps with any individual who has a disability, illness, or injury who cannot use public transport without assistance. And these different payments allow assistance for those who cannot do some things for themselves. These payments help alleviate poverty by helping those individuals living with these conditions afford things related to their condition, such as different medication and things that can help them with their mobility, such as handrail installation at their homes. Having these different payments can mean that expenses can be paid for and can mean one less worry for the individual themselves and also family members of that individual. Having these payments reduces the chances of that family having money difficulty and falling below the poverty line because it allows enough pay for a good quality of life.